The dark world of slave prostitutes in ancient Athens, in the bustling brothels of Athens. A night with a woman cost no more than 2 barley flatbreads, or even less than a jug of cheap wine. These women were called porn, a word that turned them into mere commodities, objects of chatter and trade. From the courtroom speeches of orators and philosophers like Dio and Lysias, we learned that these porn had to sleep with 6 to 10 men a day. Their meager earnings could barely buy a handful of lentils. Brothel owners filled their pockets, with a portion of the women's income flowing straight into the city's treasury as taxes, feeding Athens' so-called democracy. Athenian law set no minimum age for entering prostitution. Archaeological digs and historical records show that girls as young as 10 to 13 were dragged into these hellholes. Every enslaved girl had a permanent brand burned into her thigh with a hot iron mark that labeled her as living property, an indelible stain forever. Life in these houses was a savage nightmare. If a girl refused to work, her punishment was horrific: public whippings, days of starvation, or worse, gang rapes as collective penalties. The welcome ritual for a new girl was especially vile. She was brutally raped in full view of the other women and regular patrons. According to the memoirs of a man named Pappy from Thessaly, this was designed to shatter her completely, to snuff out any spark of hope for escape. The onlookers jeered and laughed, applauding her screams like a performance. New girls were priceless because they were untouched. Men would pay 10 times the usual rate. Writers of the time described these transactions as casually as buying fresh plums at a market stall. Privacy didn't exist. Women worked in corners of large rooms, separated only by filthy rags or mats. Every rape, every forced act echoed like the room's background music. For the waiting men, these moans were pure entertainment. Before we dig deeper into these buried pains and acts of resistance, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us amplify the voices that were silenced in life. The owners of these women sorted them into stomach-churning categories: Nubian ones, those who were unusually short, the speechless, the fighters, or the ones still unbroken. Each category had its own price tag and clientele. 5th century artworks depict scenes of men competing to forcibly overpower a resisting woman for sheer amusement. Graffiti on brothel walls reveals that some customers paid extra to inflict severe harm, slashing faces, carving scars, or causing permanent maimings. Violence was marketed like wine. Some were advertised specifically for punishment: lips split open, teeth shattered, burns from the tips of oil lamps. These wounds were the thrill some men sought. A woman's agony became their masterpiece, her screams a drunken symphony. In the same city that boasted philosophy and theater, cruelty toward women was the most profitable trade. But the daily brutality paled in comparison to the hell of religious festivals, especially during the Dionysia celebrations. Porn were handed over for free to groups of drunken men framed as a sacred ritual. Surviving accounts describe it shamelessly. Amid blaring music and flowing wine, group rapes unfolded. Men placed bets on how long the victim could endure. On those days, the last shred of a woman's dignity vanished. She became the crowd's plaything, a slab of meat. Medical notes from the era record deaths from internal ruptures, suffocations, and massive blood loss. Priests presented these rapes as offerings to the gods. Wine mixed with the women's blood on the altar, their final breaths twisted into prayers for bountiful harvests. When the festivals ended, survivors were dragged back to the brothel to resume work. The dead were tossed into ravines outside the city like garbage. This ritual savagery was just an extension of the everyday violence. Beatings with sticks, leather straps, or bare fists. Loyal patrons sometimes joined in the punishments, inventing sadistic games for the tiniest mistakes: a spilled drop of wine, a mispronounced name, or simply allowing herself to cry. A pawn could be locked in a pitch-black cell for days, denied food or water, or tied to a stone post in the open courtyard, left shivering in soaked clothes through freezing winter nights, or baking under the scorching summer sun without a sip to drink. Owners cynically called it character correction. Anything at hand, wooden clubs, heavy wine goblets, knife hilts, became tools of discipline for disobedience. Over time, the women learned to hide their pain behind forced smiles. Tears or screams only sparked more fury. In a city that idolized the perfect human form in its art, these women's bodies turned into living canvases of bruises, burns, and scars. A woman who dared escape wasn't seen as seeking freedom, but as committing property theft. Punishments were savage and public. Runaways were branded on the forehead or chest with searing metal. Court records detail even grimmer fates. Captured women nailed to wooden boards and displayed in the town square as warnings. Death by thirst or festering infections around the nail wounds was common. Desperate ones fled to temples, throwing themselves at the altars. But priests, swayed by bribes, handed them back to their owners for a pittance. Property rights trumped divine mercy. Runaways were hauled away in chains, their blood staining the temple steps wiped clean at dawn by other slaves. Each failed attempt only multiplied the retribution. Athenian justice knew endless ways to break a woman's spirit without rendering her useless for work. But usefulness meant little when new girls were so cheap. Medical writings from the time note that few survived past their mid-20s. Causes of death were as relentless as the labor. Sexually transmitted diseases, infections from untreated wounds, utter exhaustion, and the accumulated toll of malnutrition and repeated rapes. Those with rotting sores, foul-smelling discharges, or open ulcers were still forced to work. Owners saw medical care as a waste. A fresh girl cost less than a doctor's visit. Complaints from customers about the stench of decaying flesh and blood were met with beatings as if pain could miraculously heal dying tissue. Excavations near the ruins of ancient brothels have unearthed chilling evidence. Female skeletons with severe pelvic damage from forced intercourse and childbirth. Skulls cracked from blunt force, ribs broken and healed crookily. Spinal deformities from years of strain. These bones stand as silent witnesses to systematic violence. When a woman grew too ill to earn, she was discarded without ceremony, carried beyond the city walls, and abandoned, breathing or not. In Athens, the city that set ideals of beauty and proportion, women's bodies were thrown away like shattered pottery. Pregnancy wasn't a natural event, but damage to property. Punishment was swift and cruel. Owners forced women to drink poisonous herbs, punched their bellies, or made them haul impossible loads until miscarriage. Ancient medical notes detail horrifying abortion methods, herbs that triggered violent vomiting, scalding oil poured into the womb, or sharpened wooden sticks thrust inside. If pregnancy couldn't be stopped, birth happened on the same filthy straw mat where clients were serviced. No midwives, no medicines, no sanitation. Many bled out or died from fever in the days after. Archaeologists have found tiny infant bones in drainage channels and rubbish heaps behind brothels carelessly discarded. Killing newborns was routine, especially girls or those sired by slaves. For many mothers, ending their child's life was the only mercy they could offer, sparing them the same fate. Under Athenian law, these women weren't even considered human. Their bodies and labor belonged wholly to their owners. They were saddled with fabricated debts for food, clothes, and shelter debts that ballooned daily with interest and arbitrary fines. Refusing a client, even one known for savagery or deadly demands, was impossible. Consent was a legal non-entity. Court documents from the era recount women seeking justice for abuse, but the system was rigged against them. A slave's testimony held no weight against a free man, unless she was tortured first to verify her truth. In the society that invented democracy, half the population, its women, was wholly excluded. Enslaved women sat at the very bottom, valued less than livestock, which at least got regular feed and shelter. Rarely, a woman might catch a glimpse of something better: freedom bought by a wealthy patron, or an owner training her as a musician or dancer for upscale entertainment. But for the vast majority, it was a pipe dream. The cycle of exploitation ground on mercilessly. Sometimes a woman rose as her master's or patron's favorite, gaining a private room, fine jewelry, silk dresses, instead of coarse wool, constant pampering. But these privileges were a gilded cage. Her status hung on a man's whims. A minor disobedience could send her back to the crowded brothel or get her killed. Records show these favorites lent out as hospitality gifts to visiting friends returned, the next morning like a fine wine goblet loaned to a buddy. Even at the top of this grim ladder, a woman was property. Her body an object, her worth in coins. Golden chains bound as tightly as iron shackles. Beauty and youth never lasted. Street slave or cherished mistress. Age eventually zeroed out her value. The end was always the same: an anonymous death, followed by deliberate erasure. Denied proper Greek funeral rites, their bodies were dragged beyond city limits to ravines or shallow, unmarked graves. No tombstones, inscriptions, or offerings. Even freed ones bore the stain of their past, shunned by respectable society, living ghosts, present but erased as if they'd never existed. Excavations reveal female remains mingled with broken pottery shards and household trash. Their final resting places mirrored their worth less than human. No grave markers, names, or memories. In a culture that immortalized warriors and kings in epic verse, these women's lives vanished without a trace. Their suffering was too commonplace for poetry. The cruelty didn't stop at forgetting. It was woven into entertainment. Comedians like Aristophanes portrayed porn as crude, lustful figures deserving mockery or violence. In Athenian theaters, crowds roared at stage scenes of rape, beatings, and public humiliation. Women's pain became comedic fodder. Painted pottery. In homes featured motifs of gang rapes, torture, and cruelty adorning wine cups and dining vessels, so normalized it blended into daily life. Poets lauded elegant high-class courtesans, but brothel women appeared only as punchlines. Their screams rhymed into verse, tears reduced to metaphors for rain or morning dew. In a society that elevated tragic theater to high art, real-life tragedies were turned into jokes. Athenian culture perfected the art of averting eyes from the suffering of those deemed unworthy of pity. This willful blindness fueled an economy thriving on the powerless. Brothel taxes filled the treasury. The trade in women brought fat profits. Democracy bloomed in a society where half the population languished in bondage, and women were barred from politics entirely. As Socrates debated virtue in the Agora, just blocks away, hundreds of women were bought and sold as human goods. While Pericles praised Athens' noble spirit, the city grew rich on organized human trafficking. The marble of the Parthenon, the temple's grandeur, the theater stages, all propped up by an economy that devoured women's lives. Athens' splendor was paid for, in part, with the blood and bodies of forgotten slaves. Modern accounts of ancient Greece in textbooks or tourist guides often gloss over this reality. The classical world's dark underbelly is sanitized or omitted, lest it tarnish antiquity's glory. The tens of thousands of women who endured this vanish from the official tale, their pain scrubbed from the narrative. Yet their absence isn't silence. In Athens' ruins, their shadows linger. Unmarked graves, pottery fragments bearing their images, faint graffiti traces in ancient brothels, all whisper the same truth. Their story deserves to be told. Thanks for watching to the end. If this content moved you, subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring more of these hidden histories to light.